My name is Ethan. I'm 30 years old, and I live in a part of Seattle that still feels like a neighborhood. It's got a certain calm to it. I have a small studio apartment that looks out over a quiet tree-lined street. And I work for myself as a freelance graphic designer. I create logos for small businesses, design websites, and occasionally illustrate a children's book. It's not a path to riches, but it covers my rent and lets me create things. I've always been more of an observer than a participant. I've never really had a serious relationship. I suppose I just assumed that kind of thing would find me when the time was right. But the time never seemed to RSVP. Alas, my professional life had recently required some adult supervision, which is how I met her. Nora. She was a financial advisor specializing in creative freelancers and small business owners. Our meetings were structured, efficient, and always held in her minimalist office downtown. She was maybe a few years older than me with blonde hair she usually wore in a neat bun and a series of delicate silver rings on her fingers. She wore simple, elegant blouses and had a way of explaining tax law that was both terrifying and reassuring. She wasn't overly friendly. She was focused. She had this direct, no-nonsense way of speaking that cut through all my anxieties about money. But I never said more than what was necessary. Here are my quarterly earnings. Yes, I have the receipts. Thank you. That was the extent of our interactions. To her, I was just another client file, another set of spreadsheets. Then, on our fourth and final scheduled meeting, a Thursday afternoon, something shifted. We had just gone over my projected income for the next 6 months. She'd given me a clear, manageable plan. She closed her laptop with a soft click, folded her hands on the desk, and looked at me. The professional mask seemed to soften just a little. "Okay, Ethan," she said, her voice losing its clinical edge. "That concludes our scheduled business." I started gathering my papers ready to leave. "Now," she continued, and I paused, looking up at her. For the real business, I was completely thrown. "The way," she said, gesturing to the book, "just to talk numbers." I felt a warmth creep up my neck. "Well, I figured you were the expert. Plus, I was curious about the person who could make amortization sound interesting." She let out a quiet, throaty laugh, and it was the first time I'd ever heard it. It was real. "You remember that?" she asked. I tilted my head. "Of course I do. You're the only client who ever asked me to explain it twice. I remember all my clients, but you never talk about yourself. It's a little mysterious." My face felt hot. I'm not great with small talk." She smiled, and for a moment the air in that sterile office felt different, like the pressure had dropped. Then she said, "Well, you've just shown me more of yourself in the last 2 minutes than in the last 2 months combined. So I guess this makes us something other than business associates." That caught me completely off guard. I laughed, a nervous, genuine sound. "I guess it does." She nodded. "All right, mystery man. Don't go hiding all the good stuff in there." She gestured to the sketchbook. And with that, the meeting was truly over. I just stood on the sidewalk outside her building for a minute, my portfolio in one hand, my heart doing a strange, unfamiliar rhythm in my chest. For the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like an invisible man just moving through the city. I had no idea what to do with that feeling. But I knew one thing for sure. That afternoon when she closed her laptop and smiled was the first moment I felt seen. That night, sleep was out of the question. Not because I was anxious or worried, but because my thoughts kept replaying those final 10 minutes in her office. The sound of her voice when it softened. Her focused gaze turning into genuine curiosity. That tiny flicker of something unguarded in her eyes. I think that was the beginning. I didn't fall in love. Not in that instant. But a door inside me that had been painted shut for years had just been cracked open. For once, I wanted to follow up. Not just about my taxes, but about her. The days after Nora asked about my sketchbook were a masterclass in awkwardness. I had to send her a follow-up email about some paperwork, which I was supposed to be doing. But little by little, I found some courage. I started to reply with more than just a polite sign-off. One day, I saw on her professional social media page that she sponsored a local youth art program. I sent her a message. "Saw you're supporting the Youth Art Center. That's really cool. She replied almost immediately. Oh yeah. I have a 6-year-old who thinks finger painting is a competitive sport, so I'm invested. I was quiet for a second, then typed back. You have a kid? She didn't hesitate. Yep, Liam. He's in 1st grade, obsessed with rockets, and refuses to eat anything green. What about you? Any secret identities I should know about? I laughed out loud. Just me. Never really got the whole family thing started. There's still time, she replied. That phrase echoed in my head for the rest of the day. Over the next couple of weeks, this became our new normal. We'd exchange emails or messages that started about business but drifted into everything and nothing. Her favorite authors, my most difficult clients, the time she tried to bake a sourdough loaf during lockdown and nearly set off the fire alarm. She told stories with an ease that suggested she wasn't afraid of being judged. And the more I listened, the more I sensed the deep well of strength in her. She never said it directly, but you could feel it in the spaces between her words when she mentioned her ex-husband. You could sense a weariness in her tone. She was wounded, not broken, but definitely tired. I never tried to solve her problems. I wasn't her hero, but I was present. Sometimes I'd attach a small silly doodle to the bottom of an email. Today's forecast. Cloudy with a 90% chance of me messing up my invoicing. She replied with a simple, ha. But I knew she was smiling on the other side of the screen. Then one Friday things changed again. The sun had already set and I was walking home from a late-night work session at a coffee shop when I passed a small independent bookstore and saw her through the window browsing alone. I hesitated on the sidewalk. Then I pushed open the door. Hey, I said. She turned. A look of surprise crossed her face. Ethan, she said, her voice warm but cautious. What are you doing here? We continued walking. Eventually, we ended up at a small waterfront park with a wooden bench facing the sound. She sat down and I joined her. She pulled a small thermos from her tote bag. Want some tea? It's probably lukewarm by now. I nodded. Sure. We drank and watched the ferries glide across the dark water. Then very quietly, she said, You're different. How am I different? I asked. You're not trying to get something from me. You're just here. I don't know if I've ever really had that before. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Not like some grand romantic movie scene, but more like my body was short-circuiting because it knew I was about to do something incredibly bold. I turned to face her. She held my gaze, and before I could talk myself out of it, I asked, What would you do if I kissed you right now? There was a beat of silence, maybe half a second long. Then she smiled, a small but undeniable smile. She leaned in a little, not closing the whole distance, just enough for me to feel the warmth of her breath. Find out, she whispered. So I did. It wasn't an explosion of fireworks. There was no swelling orchestra. It wasn't like anything I'd seen in a film. It was real. Her lips were soft, but there was a deep sadness in the kiss. A hesitation, like she'd been down this road before and wasn't sure she wanted to open that gate again. When we drew back, she studied my face for a long time. I had no idea what to say. I just looked back at her. Finally, she spoke. I haven't done that in a very long time. Me neither, I confessed. She stood up. I should get home to my son. I nodded. We didn't embrace. We didn't make any promises for the future. She just gave me a tired but warm smile and walked away. I remained on that bench long after she was gone, wondering what had just transpired, wondering if it held any meaning, wondering if I had just made the most significant mistake or the best decision of my entire life. The morning after the kiss, I texted her, but she was always prompt, always professional. The silence was deafening. I tried to focus on work, sketching out a logo for a new client, but my hand felt unsteady. The lines were all wrong. All day, I spun a web of possible explanations. Maybe she was busy. Maybe Liam was sick. Maybe she lost her phone. But by late afternoon, a colder, sharper truth began to surface. She regretted it. I fought against the thought. That kiss had felt so real to me. It wasn't about passion or confusion. It was about a quiet, honest connection. I was certain she had felt it, too. But her silence now, That wasn't the behavior of someone who was hopeful. That was the behavior of someone erecting a fortress. I gave it a day, then two. No texts, no emails, no doodles, no tea by the water. By the third day, the uncertainty was eating me alive. It was Monday afternoon. I knew her work schedule. I walked to her office building just before 5. I stood across the street for a minute, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. Then I went inside. I told the receptionist I had a quick question for Nora. A minute later, she came out to the lobby, her face tightening for a fraction of a second when she saw me, then settling into a blank professional mask. "Ethan," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Can we talk?" I asked. She hesitated. "I have a meeting in 5 minutes." "I'll wait," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. She led me to a small, empty conference room. My stomach churned with every tick of the clock on the wall. At 5:06, she came in and sat across the vast polished table from me, her arms crossed, her eyes looking tired. She didn't speak, so I did. "Did I do something wrong?" She blinked as if surprised by my directness. "No, Ethan, you didn't do anything wrong." "Then why are you avoiding me?" She let out a long, slow breath and stared down at the table. "I'm not avoiding you," she said softly. "I'm protecting myself." I frowned. "From me?" She shook her head. So I asked again, "Did I do something wrong?" "You for anything complicated?" I said, "I just like being around you." "That's exactly why it's so scary," she whispered. The silence that fell between us wasn't angry or cold. It was just heavy, weighted with the things we both wanted to say but knew wouldn't fix the situation. I nodded slowly, the understanding dawning on me. "Okay," I said, repeating the word to convince myself. "Okay, I get it. I don't like it, but I get it." She looked genuinely surprised. "You're not going to argue?" I offered a weak smile. I've never been good at arguing, especially not when I can see that someone is hurting. A sad smile touched her lips. "You're a good man, Ethan." I pushed my chair back and stood up. "Yeah, that seems to be my brand." She stood as well. "Take care of yourself." "You too." I gave her a small final nod, then turned to leave. Before my hand reached the door, she called out my name, her voice soft. "Wait." I looked back. "I'm not saying this is forever," she said. "I'm just saying not right now." I nodded again, unable to trust my voice. Then I walked out. That night, sleep was a stranger again. But this wasn't the hopeful sleeplessness from before. It wasn't exactly heartbreak either. It was a hollow, confusing emptiness. I didn't feel rejected. I felt paused, like an author had started a promising chapter, but left the rest of the page completely blank. In the days that followed, I didn't try to contact her. Not because I didn't want to, but because I had to respect what she'd asked for. Not right now meant she needed space, and I refused to be another man who trampled over her boundaries. I still thought about her every morning. I still found myself checking my phone out of habit. I still wondered if she ever thought about me. One night, I typed out a long email, but never sent it. Every word was true. "I'm still here if you ever change your mind. I'm not going anywhere." I saved it in my drafts and closed my laptop. Sometimes the most difficult part of love isn't the pain of loss. It's the agony of waiting. I had gotten home from work around 6:30, dropped my messenger bag by the door, made a sad bowl of instant noodles, and was half watching a documentary I couldn't focus on when I heard a faint thump from the hallway outside my apartment. I muted the TV, listened, then got up and opened the door. The hall was empty, but on my doormat sat a plain manila envelope. No postage, no return address. My name, Ethan, was written on the front in familiar, neat handwriting. I bent down and picked it up slowly. My heart began to beat a little faster. Inside, there was a single folded piece of paper, a printout from a local arts blog about an upcoming gallery opening for a landscape photographer. Tucked inside the fold was a small note written on a piece of her professional letterhead. "If you still want to talk, I'll be here this Sunday at 6 p.m. No expectations, no pressure." She hadn't signed her name or left the number, but she didn't need to. I knew. My heart gave a powerful lurch. I hadn't realized how much tension I'd been holding in my shoulders until that exact moment when it all began to release. The next few days were an exercise in patience. I didn't even try to act normal at work. I spilled coffee on a final design draft, sent the wrong file to a client, and found myself staring out my studio window like a character in a melancholy film. By the time Sunday arrived, I was a bundle of nerves. I got to the gallery 20 minutes early. It was a small, bright space in Pioneer Square. I walked around pretending to study the photographs, my hands shoved deep in my pockets, my leg bouncing with anxiety. 6 o'clock came, then 6:02, 6:05. I told myself to be calm. Maybe she was looking for parking. Maybe she got held up. Then I heard the soft chime of the gallery door. I turned and there she was, Nora. Her hair was down, falling over her shoulders. No makeup, just an old soft-looking sweater and jeans. She looked exactly as I remembered and entirely different from the professional I'd first met. She walked over, stood beside me without a word, and we both looked at a large photograph of the rocky Pacific coastline. "I brought you something," she said, her voice low. She held out a small rolled-up tube of paper. "So many people in my life try to fix me or treat me like I'm some project they need to manage. You never did that. You just listened. That's all I ever wanted to do," I said honestly. She turned to face me. "My ex is back in the picture. Not for me, for Liam. He wants supervised weekend visits. He's sober again. Or so he says. He's trying." I remained quiet, letting her speak. "I couldn't trust my own judgment about men after him," she continued. "And then you showed up and I felt something real and it terrified me." I exhaled slowly. "Nora, I never wanted to make your life more complicated." "I know," she said. "And that's what made you so different." Another pause. She gestured toward the exit. "Can we get out of here?" We walked to the waterfront park to the same bench. The air was crisp and cool. "Do you still think about that night?" she asked. "All the time," I admitted. "What if I told you I'm not ready for anything serious, but I want to start over really slowly? Would that be okay?" I turned to her. "Are we talking coffee slow or bench by the water slow?" She laughed. A real genuine laugh. "Somewhere in between." I nodded then. "Yeah, that's more than okay." We sat there until the city lights began to sparkle across the water. We weren't two people rushing toward a conclusion, but two people quietly acknowledging a beginning. This matters. When we finally stood up to leave, she didn't say goodbye. She just looked at me and said, "I'll see you tomorrow." "Same time?" I asked. "Same time." She walked toward her car and I stayed on the bench for a minute longer, watching the ferries and feeling the cool breeze on my face. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel stuck in limbo. I felt like we were moving slowly, honestly, and together, completely natural. I wasn't trying to be a surrogate father. I was just Ethan, the guy who could draw cool aliens and who fixed his broken model rocket. We started weaving our lives together in small, simple ways. Picnics at Gasworks Park, trips to the farmer's market, movie nights at her apartment. The three of us would share a giant bowl of popcorn while Liam fell asleep halfway through the film, and Nora and I would sit in the quiet aftermath, too comfortable and content to need words. We avoided the word relationship for a long time. Not because it wasn't one, but because giving it a name too early felt like it would make it fragile, like something we could shatter just by speaking it aloud. She still had her difficult days. Sometimes she would retreat into herself, going quiet for hours. Once I came over and found her sitting on her bathroom floor holding a framed photo of Liam as a baby. She didn't say much. Just, "I really thought my life would look so different by now." I didn't offer solutions or platitudes. I just sat on the floor beside her. She leaned her head against my shoulder and whispered, "You make it easier to breathe." That was the night I knew with absolute certainty that I was in love with her. Not the frantic, dramatic love of stories, but the quiet, steady kind. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself because it shows up day after day. In July, I lost my biggest client. They were acquired by a larger company and my contract was terminated. It hit me hard, not just in my bank account, but in my confidence. I felt small and useless, like I had nothing to offer her anymore. I stopped texting for 2 days, retreating into my own head. On the third day, she showed up at my apartment unannounced, stood in my doorway with a determined look on her face, and said, "Don't you dare disappear on me, Ethan. Not after everything." I confessed that I felt like a failure. She said, "Well, I felt like a failure the day I signed my divorce papers, and yet here we are." Neither in the quiet nights on her comfortable, worn-out couch, Nora's smile began to change. It wasn't the polite, practiced one she used with clients anymore. This smile was softer, unburdened. It was the smile of someone who had finally let her guard down and found it was safe to do so. A month ago, I brought up the idea of us living together. It wasn't a surprise or a grand gesture with a ring hidden in a cupcake. It was just a quiet breakfast. She was spreading jam on a piece of toast for Liam. I said, "What would you think about maybe finding a place together? The three of us?" She didn't reply right away. She just finished making the toast, set it on the plate, and sat down. Then she looked at me and said, "You're the first man I've ever trusted enough to even consider sharing a roof with again. So yeah, let's find a place." We didn't make a big event out of it. We just started looking. We found a 2-bedroom townhouse on a quiet street. It had a small fenced-in yard for Liam and a kitchen with atrocious green countertops. But she loved the light, so I did too. Today is our first morning in our new home. Liam is still asleep in his new room. Nora is curled up on the couch in one of my old hoodies, her feet tucked beneath her, reading a novel. The air smells like coffee and fresh paint. I sit down next to her. She leans against me without a word. We don't need to talk as much anymore. We just know. After a few minutes of comfortable silence, I say, "Do you remember what I asked you that night in the park?" She smiles without looking up from her book. "You asked me what I would do if you kissed me." She closes her book, turns her head to face me, and her eyes are soft and clear. And I said, "Find out."